Hi, this is Tanya Thompson from Of-CourseOnline.com, and I hope that you're having a really good week so far. I've got a topic that I really want to discuss with you today, and that is the importance of anatomy and knowing your anatomy and how to actually implement the knowledge of your anatomy, in other words, that theory, into an actual moving person. So it's so easy to have all the textbooks and to study all of this work and write the exams and ace anatomy with like 95%. But as soon as that individual is moving in front of you, can you actually assess what is happening? Can you put all those puzzle pieces together? Do you understand the muscle recruitment pattern? So often we go into new things like fascia, and we go into all of the new discoveries that are coming out, and somehow we lose or we forget the actual fundamentals. We can't delete the muscles, we actually really need to know them. And I always say that if I go for brain surgery, I really want to go to the doctor who studied the brain. So if I'm going to somebody who's going to teach me movement, I want to go to the individual that studied how the body moves. And this is one of those huge gaps in the industry where anatomy is given so superficially that we don't actually delve into what is really moving us. And even better than that, when it moves us, what does it feel like? And that's vitally important. If you know what these movements feel like when they are done correctly versus what they feel like when they're done in not such great form, you will know exactly what that client is feeling like right now when they do that exercise. But if we have a look at compensations, modifications for exercises, it's really difficult to be able to actually do modifications, assists, and assess compensations if you do not know what that client's anatomy is doing. We get people that are hypermobile and they can get into all the ranges with their body, and then we get individuals that are naturally tighter, or because of their everyday activities, their functional movements, they just don't have range and movement and flexibility in their body. But we have to break it down. This morning we had a lady come into the studio, and we've actually referred her on to the physiotherapist first before she actually comes to us. And she said she was actually doing a specific class at a body tech studio, which is like a suit that you put on and you train, and it makes your muscles work while you're training as well. And the instructor, and we actually have seen her in the building, so we know that her body is not nice and mobile, it's not stress-free, it's tight, and there are definite shoulder restrictions because it looks like this. So he went and he was actually doing a shoulder stretch with her like this. Now if he was body aware of her body, he would have just off the bat been able to look at her and see the upper torso has stress. So when I take her into the stretch, I have to activate upper trapezius, the vata scapula, to get her arm as high as I'm expecting the arm to go. We know it should only go about 65 degrees behind us, but he actually took her to 90 degrees with a tight shoulder. And that ended up getting a huge spasm in her neck, and this spasm has now come all the way down the body. If he understood what the compensation of her body would be, because she has tight biceps, tight anterior deltoid, he would have known in order to get her to that height, she would have had to completely anteriorly tilt that scapula and pull into her upper trapezius and her levator scapula. And just as it would be, her body went into spasm. She told him at that point that this had happened, and the session just carried on. So when we look at anatomy, we don't only look at it from the perspective of what does the muscle do, we also look at when it's not doing that, or it is too tight, how would it affect the antagonist's movement concentrically. If you have a look at the long head of the tricep, which is actually attached onto your scapula, and you know what movements it produces, besides elbow extension, it also does shoulder extension and a mild amount of adduction. So if you know that, and your client is doing tricep work, and their arms are out here the whole time, your head immediately goes, oh, I'm missing that long head to get it to its most concentric form. So now I need to ask my client to pull that arm closer, and they're going to go, oh, I'm getting a cramp right over there. Yes, because you now got the long head of the tricep on the scapula to do its partial adduction with the shoulder extension, with the elbow extension. And now we're getting into a repetition that really counts. Now you don't need 1,000 repetitions. You just need to load that movement and do like 5, 6 to 10 to 15 of those, and you're going to get maximum output for that muscle rather than cheating and doing 50 of these. If we have a look at the hips, for example, if we don't understand the relationship between the hip flexors and the glutes and the rectus femoris completely on its own, then we won't know why clients are producing certain compensations. We're trying to get hip stability, or we're trying to get stronger hips. We're possibly taking big looking muscles like the glutes and loading it too little in relation to the amount of fibers that it has, and therefore we're not getting it to strengthen quite like we want it to. Not only are we possibly not loading it enough, but we also forget that if the hip flexor or the rec fem is actually physically tight, we are going to struggle to get to that 15 or 20 degrees of hip extension. So we get people doing pelvic hinges or bridges or curls, and as they go up, they can do this part because we're still not in that full stretch for that rec fem. But as they come up here, they cannot maintain that line. And if they can't get into that straight line there, they're really going to struggle to get into their glutes properly. So what we end up doing is we actually take them halfway because that's more efficient for them and more effective for them. They'll actually get into their glutes there. But now you think to yourself, well, this is really low load. And that glute max is such a big muscle with so many fibers that I'm going to have to get them to get this muscle a little bit more. And this client's been with me for so long, but they're just not getting the strength that I really want out of them. So that glute max has to be loaded a little bit more. And as soon as you load that big superficial muscle, it immediately kicks in because it's probably one of the only big superficial muscles that can handle the load that you're giving it. So sometimes the load we're giving these muscles is also not relative to their size. If we have a look at anatomy and we look at all the muscles that produce medial shoulder rotation versus lateral shoulder rotation, we'll see that we have bigger, more medial shoulder rotators just because of our functional everyday movements. Our lateral rotators, being the infraspinatus and the teres minor and a little bit of supraspinatus, is so much smaller in relation to pec major, latissimus dorsi with teres major and subscapularis. So therefore we cannot expect the lateral rotators to be able to pull the same amount of load as what our medial rotators can because they're smaller muscles, which means they have less fibers. The bigger the muscles are, the more load they can handle because of the more fibers they have to actually handle that load. When we look at anatomy, for example, of the hip flexors, and we want to strengthen hip flexors, and some people are thinking, well, hip flexors are always in spasm, why would we want to strengthen hip flexors? You would need to strengthen hip flexors for certain movements. If you are not a runner, and you decide this weekend you're going to go for a run, as you're running, you're going to be so aware of your hip flexors. However, if you are actually tight in your glutes and that origin of your hamstrings, and you have to do deep hip flexion, where you pull the leg in, if you know the anatomy and you understand the anatomy, you'll know that this is going to restrict the amount of that can happen. So it ends up restricting the range. You might know that because the book says that, but when the client pulls that leg up and tucks their pelvis, are you aware of why that would happen? It could happen because here is a restriction over here. It could happen because they were just not aware that they could have maintained their pelvic position with the use of the lumbar back extensors, just like 10 or 15% activation of. Being aware that that is actually going to maintain that lumbar position where you lift that leg and you pull it in towards your chest. Are they aware that if they raise both legs, or are you aware, and they take the legs away from them and they go into that arch in the back, you immediately say, pull your pelvis to neutral, hold on with your abs. But can you visualize the rectus abdominis coming down and attaching onto that pubic symphysis and holding that pubic symphysis towards them like this as soon as that leg pulls away from them? And if they can hold that pubic symphysis with that rectus abdominis and the assistance of the obliques, they're getting true hip dissociation instead of fake hip dissociation, marginal hip dissociation. By getting lower abdominals to maintain that pubic symphysis position, they're able to move their leg freely in their socket. If we have a look at teaching exercises and assessing movements of clients, we understand that it has a feeling to it. What does it feel like? And if we can merge the anatomy knowledge we have with the movement that's happening, the compensations that's happening, and what that movement feels like, now we are creating an embodied experience of pure, good, safe movement. We're not thinking about moving around like stickmen, but we are thinking as movement professionals to get the absolute maximum benefit out of every single exercise. So if we hop onto the reformer, for example, and we're thinking of doing anything with the arms. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to sit comfortably, I've got my hands with the straps here, and I understand my client's body. And let's say the client is not that strong, and I ask them to actually pull this bed. I must know off the bat that they are going to do this to pull the bed. Why would they end up actually doing that? A few reasons. They could be tight in the actual shoulder flexors. The lower trapezius and serratus anterior might actually be struggling to keep that blade secured on the back and to keep that blade slightly abducted and then only retracted once the arms actually get behind them. Or is it possibly the neck tightness over here that's restricting that beautiful pure movement of shoulder dissociation as they're pulling the arms back? Now, it's nice to educate the client, and it is really nice to tell them these things, but not to overshare and not to overcomplicate it. I always say to the instructors that when you are teaching, your client is not always aware of how much is going through your head. But it makes teaching so much richer for you as the movement professional if you know that in your head there's a lot of puzzle pieces that are being put together because you are able to take your theoretical knowledge and you're able to put it on an individual. A sentence like stabilize your pelvis means nothing because they don't know how to stabilize their pelvis. A landscape architect has no idea how to stabilize their pelvis. If you say to a client, don't arch your back, they tend to grip on with everything in order to not arch their back. If you could say to them, to avoid arching your back, just activate your lower abdominals a little bit because it's attached to your pubic bone. And you'll see through that movement, it will pull that pubic bone through for you, and you'll get less work happening in your back at this point. Short and sweet, but now you're really educating them about how to stabilize these joints, how to not overcompensate, how to create movement that allows things like free movement, shoulder dissociation, hip dissociation, and then in your session also give them that freedom of movement. If you look at a bicep curl and you, for example, have them on a reformer or using weights, and you actually want them to pull their arms in, when they immediately drop the arms to pull in, are you aware of the fact that all that they wanted to do was get work away from the deltoid, because it makes it so much harder? Not only that, but that one head of that bicep also does that shoulder flexion. So when you maintain that height of that arm and you then pull the forearm in, the bicep work is so much more intense. So as soon as they drop the arm, they pull away from deltoid anterior and they pull away from the bicep and make the exercise easier. So you'll just say, keep your arm up, don't drop your arm, because repertoire says, and the book says, don't drop your arm. But the important thing is, why shouldn't you drop your arm? And that's vital. If you're having a look at things like posture improvement, and everybody's spines are different, and everybody's postures are different, and we have to be able to handle our spines in all kinds of positions. And posture becomes really more challenging to help correct when there are physical tightnesses in specific muscle groups. But when we don't have those tightnesses in muscles or those taut muscles, we're actually able to correct our posture pretty easily just through a better body awareness. But if you have physically tight hip flexors and you're standing in an anterior pelvic tilt, they are not going to be able to pull that pelvis through to neutral if that is actually what you want them to do. The chain reaction of them taking their pelvis and pulling it through to neutral is they actually have to bend their knees. So you as the instructor says, oh, I saw that knee bend, and I know why that knee bent. That knee bent because the hip flexors are actually tight. So now, in this position with your pelvis forward, could I ask you to straighten your knees? And you'll see that they work a lot in their quadriceps. And as soon as they're working a lot in their quadriceps to maintain straight knees with a neutral pelvis, it's for two reasons. Either the weight is back in the heels and their quads are kicking in, or their hip extensors are fighting against the hip flexors while the abdominals are trying to pull that pubic symphysis forward. And that's so important. Do you understand that if you're leaning, I'm going to take a foam roller, and let's pretend the foam roller is a wall. So you're leaning up against a wall, yeah? And you raise this leg, all right? Sorry, let me put it this side. Okay. And you push up against the wall. So the wall is dead, so I'm going to be working big time on my hips. And you're pushing up against this wall. Why this stabilizer will work. It's so easy. As I'm pushing up against this wall, the wall wants to push my body away in a closed chain manner. So to resist that closed chain shift, my hip stabilizers, glute med, and obviously glute max and glute min, have to maintain knee here. And how do we figure this out? Because we just think to ourselves, well, what would the natural movement of the body be? If somebody came and pushed you over, you would do that, and you would lose your hip stabilizers. But when you say to the client, I'm sorry, we've got loads of trucks driving past you today. It's crazy. At least we know it's busy, yeah? So if I've got my knee up against this wall and I'm pushing my knee out, and I say to the client, don't move, keep this hip holding, Basically, the wall wants to push your hip out, but your glute med and max are going to resist it. So they're resisting that closed chain force with the closed chain movement, and that's pretty cool. And all we want to do is encourage you as an instructor to delve into your anatomy. And you'll scroll down on this page, and we don't teach any courses where we're not incorporating understanding how the body works and how our theoretical knowledge can be placed into the person in front of us, and how you read my body moving and how you read his and hers and your body moving is completely different. It's not the same for everybody. If you understand what my restrictions are, you can teach me according to that, and you will understand how you can avoid the compensations that want to happen now by modifying or assisting an exercise for me. When we went and filmed our online Pilates mat course, we had 3 different individuals doing the repertoire. And the reason we did that was so that you can see how 3 different people will look doing the repertoire. During that, we had one individual doing compensations to show you what can go wrong. We then went ahead and explained to you why those compensations are happening. We then went and took that exercise and did 3 modifications and assists for each Pilates exercise, so that you can have more information about not just doing the rep that you can get off of Google, but how can I apply this repertoire to a real body? And that's my message for you today, is how can you apply your knowledge to a real person, not a sticky man. Cool. So thanks so much, and we will see you next time. Take care.